The galaxy burned. Stars that once shone over thriving human colonies now illuminated nothing but wreckage, drifting aimlessly in the void. Planets that had once echoed with laughter and life lay silent, reduced to charred ruins by the relentless onslaught of the Exalzar Empire. The war had raged for decades, and humanity was losing. What had begun as a fight for survival had turned into a desperate last stand. The once mighty fleets of the United Nations Space Force were now a shadow of their former strength, scattered remnants struggling to hold the line. The Exalzar, brutal and merciless, had conquered every human world they touched, leaving behind nothing but death. Now, their final attack was underway. The last remaining human fleet, battered and outgunned, had gathered in the Perseus sector, Earth's last line of defense. If they fell here, humanity would cease to exist. Admiral Elias Carter stood on the bridge of the UNSF Valiant, staring at the holographic display of the battlefield. The enemy was closing in, their fleet stretching across the void like an endless wave of destruction. Thousands of Exalzar warships, bristling with weapons, surrounded the last human stronghold. His officers worked frantically, relaying battle plans, calculating defensive maneuvers. But deep down, they all knew the truth: this was not a battle they could win. The Exalzar had technology far beyond human understanding. Their ships were faster, their weapons more powerful, and their numbers overwhelming. Every encounter had ended the same way, with humanity being pushed further and further back, retreating, regrouping, only to be crushed again. Carter had no reinforcements left to call, no secret weapon to deploy. The last fleet of humanity was nothing more than a handful of battered warships, their hulls scarred from 1,000 battles. He clenched his fists, knowing that his people would fight until their last breath, but the outcome was inevitable. Across the battlefield, Exalzar Lord Vezkaran watched from the command deck of his dreadnought, the Imperium's Wrath. His cold, reptilian eyes gleamed with amusement as he observed the struggling human fleet. He had crushed dozens of species in his lifetime, but none had resisted as fiercely as humanity. They were stubborn, defiant, and relentless in battle, but that only made their defeat all the more satisfying. He admired their courage, but he had no intention of offering mercy. He would finish what he had started. The command was given, and the Exalzar armada surged forward like a tidal wave, weapons primed to obliterate the last human resistance. Plasma cannons roared to life, and the void erupted into fire. Human ships retaliated, missiles and railgun rounds cutting through the darkness, but for every Exalzar ship that fell, 10 more took its place. Explosions ripped through space as the two forces clashed, ships shattering into debris, pilots screaming their last words before vanishing in the cold vacuum. The battlefield became a graveyard of metal and fire. Carter's heart pounded as he barked orders. Redirect all power to forward shields. We hold this line. The Valiant trembled under the impact of enemy fire, its shields flickering as it absorbed blow after blow. The fleet fought with everything they had, but the numbers were against them. Destroyers crumbled under the Exalzar assault, cruisers were torn apart by enemy torpedoes, and yet humanity did not retreat. They fired back with a desperation that could only come from a species with nothing left to lose. But it was not enough. The Exalzar warships broke through the defensive perimeter, surrounding the last remaining battleships. Carter gritted his teeth, knowing that in mere moments they would be wiped out. He thought of Earth, of the people waiting for a miracle that would never come. His grip tightened on the command console. This was the end. Then, the universe itself seemed to shudder. A rupture in space appeared behind the human fleet, a tear in reality that sent shockwaves through the battlefield. The Exalzar hesitated, their ships momentarily halting as they scanned the anomaly. And then it arrived, the UNSF Indomitable. It was like nothing anyone had ever seen. A warship of unimaginable scale, its dark hull gleaming with energy, its weapons pulsing with raw power. It dwarfed every other ship on the battlefield, human or Exalzar. The sheer size of it sent ripples of fear through the enemy fleet. Carter's eyes widened as the transmission came through. This is Admiral Renata of the Indomitable. We are here. Let's finish this. Silence fell over the battlefield, then chaos erupted. The Indomitable moved like a force of nature, its cannons roaring to life, unleashing a barrage of energy so powerful that entire Exalzar squadrons were vaporized in an instant. It turned its main weapon towards the largest enemy battleship, fired a single shot, and the Exalzar warship ceased to exist. The battlefield was no longer a slaughter for humanity. Now it was a war. The human fleet, fueled by a sudden surge of hope, pushed forward. Fighters swarmed, bombers rained destruction upon the enemy, and the tide began to shift. The Exalzar, who had expected an easy victory, now found themselves facing something they had never encountered before, an enemy that refused to die. Vez-Karan roared in fury, his claws digging into the armrests of his throne. This was impossible. Humanity was supposed to be finished, yet here they were, defying fate once again. The Indomitable was not just a warship, it was humanity's final answer to extinction. And as its weapons continued to tear through his fleet, he realized the unthinkable. For the first time in the war, the Exalzar were losing. The war's last stand had just turned into humanity's first strike. The battlefield was a graveyard of fire and wreckage. Human warships, once proud defenders of Earth's last hope, now drifted as lifeless husks, their hulls torn open by the relentless assault of the Exalzar armada. Explosions lit up the void, debris spiraling into the endless abyss of space. The remaining human fleet fought desperately, their railguns and missile batteries firing in every direction, but the battle was already lost. The enemy was too many, too powerful. The Exalzar, cold and efficient, showed no mercy. Their warships advanced without hesitation, their plasma cannons bombarding the last human defenses into oblivion. Admiral Elias Carter, standing on the damaged bridge of the UNSF Valiant, could do nothing but watch as his fleet crumbled. His officers struggled to maintain order, alarms blaring, reports of destroyed vessels flooding the command console. He knew the end was near. The Exalzar would wipe them out, and Earth would be next. The thought made his blood run cold. There would be no one left to resist. Humanity's legacy, its history, its people erased in fire. Carter clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay focused, even as his ship trembled under the relentless onslaught. His fleet had fought bravely, but courage alone wasn't enough. The war was over. The Exalzar had won. Then something changed. A deep tremor ran through space itself, as if the universe had taken a breath before exhaling something new, something terrible. Sensors flickered, energy readings spiked to impossible levels, and for the first time, the Exalzar hesitated. A single rupture appeared in the darkness, a tear in reality, crackling with unstable energy. Every ship, human and Exalzar alike, turned their attention toward the anomaly. It was not a natural phenomenon. Something was coming through. A presence so immense that even the Exalzar command ships, towering behemoths of destruction, suddenly seemed small. The tear expanded, and from within it emerged. A warship unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The UNSF Indomitable. A ship so massive, so advanced, that for a brief moment, silence fell over the battlefield. Its hull was forged from materials unknown to the enemy, dark and reflective, absorbing the distant starlight as if the void itself had taken shape. Its surface shimmered with energy fields more powerful than anything humanity had ever deployed. Rows of weapon systems lined its structure, each one capable of turning entire fleets into dust. It did not move like an ordinary vessel. It descended as if it was a force of nature, an entity that did not belong in the same universe as the fragile ships around it. For the first time in the war, the Exalzar did not attack. They scanned the colossal warship, searching for weaknesses, calculating how to destroy it before it could act. But the Indomitable was already moving. In a single instant, its weapons came to life. The first shot was not a warning. A pulse of raw energy erupted from the ship's central cannon, striking a Exalzar battlecruiser with pinpoint precision. The alien warship did not explode, it disintegrated. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. The battlefield ignited into chaos. The Exalzar, for all their arrogance, panicked. Their formations broke, warships scrambling to reposition, commanders barking orders in their guttural language. They had expected a dying resistance, not this. Not a warship that could turn the tide of the entire war with a single shot. Carter, still reeling from the sight, barely had time to react as the transmission came through. A steady, commanding voice echoed through the bridge. "This is Admiral Renata of the Indomitable." The Excelsior finally retaliated. Hundreds of warships opened fire at once, unleashing a storm of plasma and antimatter torpedoes, enough firepower to destroy an entire planet. The Indomitable did not retreat. It did not evade. It simply activated its defenses. A golden energy shield materialized around the ship, absorbing the onslaught like a star-consuming light. The weapons of the Excelsior, so feared throughout the galaxy, meant nothing. Then, the Indomitable struck back. Railguns fired at near-light speed, tearing through enemy cruisers as if they were made of paper. Drone swarms deployed, weaving through enemy formations, planting charges on vulnerable ships before detonating in synchronized explosions. The ship's side cannons rotated, locking onto multiple targets at once, releasing a barrage of plasma so intense that even the void seemed to burn. In mere minutes, dozens of Excelsior ships were destroyed. Lord Vez Karan, watching from the command bridge of the Imperium's Wrath, felt something unfamiliar crawl through his chest. Fear. The Excelsior Empire had crushed countless civilizations, reduced entire worlds to dust, but they had never encountered anything like this. The Indomitable was not a warship. It was a declaration. A message to the entire galaxy that humanity was not done fighting. Vez Karan snarled, his claws digging into his throne. This ship was an anomaly, an aberration in the natural order, but it could still be destroyed. He ordered his elite squadrons to launch a coordinated strike, sending his most powerful dreadnoughts to overwhelm the Indomitable. The human warship responded with terrifying efficiency. It deployed gravitational mines, each one creating miniature black holes that crushed the incoming dreadnoughts into nothingness. The Excelsior's greatest war machines, the very symbols of their empire's might, were wiped out in seconds. Carter could hardly believe what he was witnessing. Humanity, pushed to the edge of extinction, had just turned the tide. The Excelsior, once an unstoppable force, were now retreating. The mighty empire that had terrorized the galaxy was running. The battle was no longer about survival. It was about vengeance. The Indomitable was not just saving humanity, it was destroying the enemy. The transmission came through again, Admiral Renata's voice calm but unyielding. "We are not done yet. Pursue the enemy. We end this war today." Carter exhaled, gripping the command console. His fleet had been broken, beaten, but now they had a chance. A chance to fight back, a chance to reclaim everything they had lost. The war had changed. The Indomitable had arrived. And with it, humanity's greatest revenge had just begun. The universe had never witnessed such a battle before. The mighty Excelsior Empire, conquerors of 100 worlds, now faced annihilation at the hands of the very species they had sought to erase. The once invincible fleets of the Excelsior were in full retreat, their warships scattering across the void like wounded beasts. The battlefield, once dominated by their towering dreadnoughts, now belonged to humanity. And at the heart of it all stood the UNSF Indomitable. The massive warship, a titan of human engineering, moved through the wreckage like a predator hunting wounded prey. Its dark hull was scarred from battle, its weapons still glowing from the devastation it had unleashed upon the enemy. Around it, the remnants of the human fleet surged forward, chasing the retreating Excelsior with a fury that had been years in the making. This was no longer just a fight for survival, this was revenge. Admiral Elias Carter stood on the bridge of the UNSF Valiant, watching the chaos unfold before him. Just hours ago, he had prepared to die, knowing that humanity's war was lost. Now, everything had changed. The Excelsior, who had once pushed humanity to the brink of extinction, were running. Their warships, once feared across the stars, were being torn apart one by one. Every human soldier, every pilot, Every commander who had suffered under the Exalzar's cruelty now fought with the same burning rage. They had lost too much families, friends, entire worlds. There would be no mercy. The Exalzar would suffer as humanity had suffered. Carter's fingers tightened around the console as he watched a squadron of human bombers descend upon a retreating Exalzar carrier, unleashing a barrage of missiles that split the massive vessel in two. The wreckage burned, drifting lifelessly into the void. It was happening everywhere, Exalzar warships exploding, their crews screaming into the emptiness before being silenced forever. And yet, Carter knew it was not over. The Exalzar were a dying race, but dying enemies were the most dangerous of all. Deep within the remnants of the Exalzar fleet, Lord Vez-Kuran sat in the command throne of the Imperium's Wrath, his claws digging into the armrests. The once mighty warlord, who had overseen the destruction of countless human worlds, now faced the bitter taste of defeat. His empire was crumbling. His fleets, which had crushed entire civilizations without resistance, were being obliterated. It was unthinkable. The Exalzar were superior in every way, stronger, more advanced, more ruthless. And yet, the humans had defied fate itself. They had survived. No, they had done more than survive. They were winning. The thought sent a furious growl rumbling through Vez-Kuran's chest. He would not allow this. If the Exalzar were to fall, then they would take humanity with them. His cold, reptilian eyes narrowed as he issued the command. Activate the Exterminus Protocol. A stunned silence fell over the Exalzar bridge. The Exterminus Protocol was a last resort, a weapon of ultimate destruction. It had never been used before, for no species had ever forced the Exalzar into such desperation. It was not a strategy for victory. It was a strategy for obliteration. Across the remaining Exalzar ships, hidden compartments opened, revealing warheads unlike any humanity had ever encountered. These were not simple bombs. They were star killers, weapons designed to ignite entire planetary atmospheres, reducing worlds to lifeless, burning wastelands. They were meant to erase species, not armies. And now, the Exalzar would unleash them upon the humans. If they could not rule the galaxy, then neither would humanity. The war would end in fire. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Renata's sharp eyes flicked to the incoming data streams. Something was wrong. The Exalzar were no longer simply fleeing. Their ships were changing formation, moving with new, terrifying purpose. Then, the readings came in. High-energy spikes detected across multiple Exalzar vessels. The realization hit like a hammer. They were preparing to deploy weapons of planetary destruction. Her stomach twisted. The Indomitable surged forward with impossible speed. Its cannons roared, unleashing devastating blasts of energy that tore through the Exalzar ranks. Human ships followed, firing everything they had, desperate to stop the enemy before the weapons could be deployed. But it was not enough. The Exalzar, knowing they were doomed, did not defend themselves. They focused only on their mission: launch the warheads. Burn humanity to the ground. Carter's heart pounded as the Exalzar dreadnoughts finally launched the first wave of warheads. He watched in horror as the deadly weapons streaked through the void, heading straight for human-controlled space. If they reached their targets, Earth itself could be destroyed. The battlefield became a race against time. Fighters scrambled, interceptors maneuvered desperately, attempting to shoot the warheads down. Some were successful explosions lit up the void as a few warheads were detonated before reaching their targets. But there were too many. The Exalzar had ensured that no matter what, some would get through. And then, the Indomitable did the impossible. The massive warship shifted, aligning itself with the trajectory of the warheads. Its engines roared to life, pushing its colossal form into their path. And then, it activated its final defense. A pulse of unimaginable energy radiated outward, a gravity field so powerful that even the stars seemed to bend. The warheads, caught in the pull, were ripped apart before they could reach their targets. The Exalzar's ultimate plan, their final act of destruction, neutralized. Vez-Kuran stared at the scene in shock. His empire had fallen. His last weapon had failed, and now the Indomitable was coming for him. The warship turned, its cannons locking onto the Imperium's wrath. There was no escape. The Exalzar warlord closed his eyes as the final shot was fired. The blast tore through his ship, consuming it in a firestorm of energy. The last warlord of the Exalzar was no more. As the dust settled, the battlefield was silent. The Exalzar were gone. Their empire had been erased. The war was over. Carter exhaled, feeling the weight of victory settle upon his shoulders. Humanity had survived. They had done more than survive, they had won. And as the Indomitable turned toward the remains of the human fleet, its weapons finally silent, a new era had begun. The wrath of a dying race had been unleashed, but humanity had endured. The galaxy would remember this day. The day humanity refused to die. The war had lasted too long. Humanity had been fighting the ruthless Zarix dominion for decades, and every battle had brought them closer to extinction. The Zarix were brutal, relentless, and technologically superior. They had crushed every civilization that stood in their way, reducing entire worlds to lifeless husks. Humanity had resisted, but the cost had been unbearable. Millions had died. Planets had burned. The once proud fleets of Earth were reduced to scattered remnants, desperately fighting against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. And now, the war had reached its darkest hour. The Zarix Armada had arrived at Titan's Gate, the last stronghold between them and Earth. If Titan's Gate fell, there would be nothing left to stop the invasion. Humanity would be wiped out. Admiral Ethan Drake stood on the bridge of the UNSF Resolute, staring at the massive enemy fleet that filled the void before him. Hundreds of Zarix warships, each one larger and deadlier than anything humanity had ever built, were advancing in perfect formation. Their weapons glowed with a sickening red light, charging for the final attack. Every human soldier on Titan's Gate knew the truth: this was the last stand. There would be no reinforcements, no escape. Either they stopped the Zarix here, or Earth would be destroyed. Drake's grip tightened on the railing as he turned to his crew. "We hold the line," he said, his voice steady. "No matter what happens, we fight until the last ship, the last bullet, the last breath. If this is where we die, then we take as many of them with us as we can." The Zarix launched their attack. A wall of plasma fire tore through the human defenses, turning smaller ships into blazing wrecks. The Resolute shook violently as explosions erupted across its hull. Drake gritted his teeth. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they would not surrender. Human warships fought back with everything they had. Torpedoes and railgun rounds streaked through space, slamming into the enemy's shields. Fighters weaved through the chaos, dodging enemy fire as they targeted weak points in the Zarix formations. But it was not enough. For every Zarix ship destroyed, 3 more took its place. The human fleet was being torn apart. One by one, their defenses crumbled. The Resolute's engines flickered. Its weapons overheated. The bridge was filled with alarms and smoke. It was only a matter of time before the end came. And then, the impossible happened. A new energy signature appeared on the scanners, massive, powerful, and moving fast. Before anyone could react, a bright flash of light illuminated the battlefield. A colossal warship, unlike anything seen before, dropped out of hyperspace. Its sleek black hull was adorned with the insignia of the United Nations Space Force, but it was larger, deadlier, and more advanced than any human vessel ever built. The ship's name flashed across the screen: UNSF Invictus. A legend. A myth. It had been rumored that humanity had been working on a secret weapon, a battleship built in the shadows, using every scrap of alien technology humanity had stolen from its enemies. But no one had truly believed it. Until now. The Invictus moved like a predator, cutting through the chaos of battle with terrifying precision. Its weapons came to life, unleashing a storm of destruction. Beams of energy ripped through the Zarix warships, shattering their shields as if they were made of glass. Torpedoes streaked through the void, striking the enemy's command ships with pinpoint accuracy. In mere seconds, the tide of battle shifted. The Zareks, who'd been moments away from total victory, suddenly found themselves on the defensive. They turned their guns toward the Invictus, unleashing everything they had. But the Invictus did not falter. Its shields absorbed the onslaught without slowing. Its weapons continued to fire with merciless efficiency. It was a monster, an unstoppable force of war. Drake watched in stunned silence as the Invictus tore through the enemy fleet. His crew cheered, disbelief turning into hope. "They actually built it," he whispered. The Zareks, once so confident, now scrambled in panic. Their formations broke. Their dreadnoughts, which had once inspired fear across the galaxy, fled. The human fleet, reinvigorated by the sight of their savior, pushed forward. Fighters swarmed the retreating enemy. Destroyers picked off stragglers. The battle had turned. The Zareks, who'd been moments away from exterminating humanity, were now the ones being hunted. But the Invictus was not finished. It locked onto the Zarek's mothership, the massive command vessel at the heart of the invasion force. If the Zarek's leader was allowed to escape, the war would continue. There could be no mercy. The Invictus charged its primary weapon, a supercharged railgun designed to punch through planetary defenses. The Zarek's mothership fired desperately, trying to escape, but it was too late. The railgun fired. The round pierced the enemy flagship, slicing it clean in half. The Zarek's leader was dead. The enemy's last hope was gone. The battlefield fell silent. The remaining Zarek ships, leaderless and broken, surrendered. The war was over. Humanity had stood at the edge of extinction and survived. The crew of the Resolute erupted into cheers, their exhaustion forgotten in the face of victory. Drake exhaled, closing his eyes for a brief moment. The price had been high. Too many had died. Too many worlds had been lost. But this was the turning point. As the Invictus moved through the wreckage, its weapons finally silent, one truth became clear. Humanity had not just survived. They had changed the course of history, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The stars burned with the remnants of a dying battle. The war between humanity and the Varak Dominion had reached its final, brutal stage. For years, the alien empire had crushed human colonies, wiped out entire fleets, and left Earth isolated, a wounded world waiting for its end. The Varak were superior in every way: faster ships, stronger weapons, and an empire that had stood undefeated for centuries. But humanity was not known for surrendering. And today, on the battlefield above Sigma Prime, they would give their final answer. The UNSF Revenant, a battered but defiant warship, stood at the heart of what remained of the human fleet. Admiral Jonas Rourke watched the approaching enemy armada with cold determination. The Varak had sent everything they had for this last battle. Their fleet stretched across the void like a massive storm, their capital ships glowing with the energy of their devastating weapons. Humanity's forces were outnumbered, outgunned, and nearly broken. The enemy believed this would be the final nail in humanity's coffin. But Rourke had other plans. A message came through the bridge, crackling through the damaged comm systems. "Admiral, the last line of defenses is failing. They're moving in fast." The officer's voice was tense, but Rourke didn't flinch. His eyes remained locked on the holographic display, watching as the Varak dreadnoughts pushed forward. These monsters had burned human cities, slaughtered civilians, and laughed as Earth's defenses crumbled. They expected another desperate, failing stand, but they didn't know what was waiting for them. "Hold the line," Rourke said, his voice calm. "They think we're finished. Let them believe it." His fingers hovered over the final command sequence, the last move in a game that had already been decided. Humanity had spent the last decade losing battle after battle, falling back, retreating, suffering. The Varak had believed it was weakness, but it was strategy. Every world lost, every ship sacrificed, had been part of a plan. A plan to bring the enemy right here. The enemy ships closed in, their weapons charging for the final strike. And then the trap was sprung. From the darkness of space, hundreds of hidden human warships decloaked, appearing from seemingly nowhere. The Varak hesitated for a fraction of a second, but it was already too late. The first wave of human ships opened fire, unleashing a coordinated storm of missiles, railgun slugs, and energy blasts. The Varak fleet reeled as their lead ships exploded, torn apart by the sudden, vicious assault. Panic rippled through their ranks. The predators had become the prey. The UNSF Retribution, Earth's most advanced battleship, led the charge. Its main cannon fired a concentrated energy beam, slicing through an enemy capital ship like it was made of paper. Varak fighters scrambled, trying to counter the ambush, but human interceptors were already upon them. The void became a chaotic battlefield, explosions lighting up the darkness as one Varak ship after another fell. On the Revenant, Rourke watched with satisfaction. They never saw it coming, he muttered. Humanity had played the longest, bloodiest game of deception in history, pretending to be weak, pretending to be on the verge of collapse, all to lure the Varak into one final, inescapable battle. And now the enemy was trapped. But the Varak were still dangerous. Their flagship, the Emperor's Wrath, loomed in the distance, its massive cannons preparing to wipe out the human fleet in one devastating attack. If it fired, the battle would turn again. Humanity's last chance would be lost. Rourke couldn't let that happen. All ships, target the flagship, he ordered. The Revenant and its allies surged forward, weapons locking onto the behemoth. But the Varak weren't done fighting. Their remaining warships formed a protective wall, shielding their leader. Human ships began taking heavy losses, torn apart by the enemy's last stand. But they had come too far to stop now. Then, a transmission came through, heavily distorted but unmistakable. "This is the UNSF Valkyrie. We are in position." A flicker of a smile crossed Rourke's face. The Valkyrie, the final piece of the plan. A prototype warship carrying humanity's deadliest weapon. It had remained hidden, waiting for this very moment. "Execute the final strike," Rourke commanded. From the Valkyrie, a single torpedo launched. But this was no ordinary weapon. It was a singularity warhead, a terrifying piece of technology created in secret, one that could rip space apart. The torpedo streaked across the battlefield, dodging enemy fire as it closed in on the Emperor's Wrath. The Varak fired every defense they had, but nothing could stop it. Impact. For a second, there was silence. Then, space itself collapsed. A vortex of destruction engulfed the Varak flagship, tearing it apart at the atomic level. The shockwave blasted outward, consuming the enemy's remaining forces. The Varak Dominion, the empire that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, was no more. The battlefield went quiet. The remaining human ships drifted. The war was over. Rourke exhaled slowly. The cost had been unimaginable. Too many lives lost. Too many worlds burned. But in the end, humanity had won. Not because they were stronger, not because they were more advanced, but because they refused to die. A final transmission was sent out to all surviving forces, both human and alien. A simple message. Humanity's final answer. We are still here.